April 7, 1945, Tokyo Bay. The first rays of sunlight stretched across the horizon. The sea shimmered gold. Fishing boats drifted near the coast. Farmers bent over rice fields, beginning another day of labor. Smoke rose from chimneys in small villages surrounding the capital. High above, faint streaks began to appear in the pale sky. At first they seemed like scratches, thin and harmless, but soon they grew clearer. Dozens of aircraft were moving westward. Their engines hummed faintly in the distance, a sound that did not belong here. They were not Japanese. They were American, 91 P-51D Mustangs, the sleek, long-range fighters of the United States Army Air Forces. Each had flown from Iwo Jima, a volcanic island seized by Marines only weeks before. That island was 750 miles away. Japanese commanders had sworn that no single-engine fighter could make that journey, let alone fight and return. Distance was their shield. Now, in the pale light of dawn, that shield was gone. Below, Mount Fuji rose above the haze, its snow-covered peak shining against the sky. For centuries it had been the symbol of Japan's permanence, a mountain unshaken by time. On this morning it served another purpose. It became a navigation point for the American pilots streaming across the homeland, a reminder to the Japanese people that the impossible had arrived. If you enjoy deep dives into hidden chapters of World War II, make sure you subscribe and ring the bell. That way, you will not miss the next story where we uncover the machines, the men, and the moments that decided history. Only 2 years earlier, no planner would have believed this was possible. A single-engine fighter could not escort bombers across hundreds of miles of ocean. It lacked the range, the fuel, and the endurance. Even the Navy's carrier fighters had nowhere near the distance required. Without escorts, bombers were vulnerable. Japanese interceptors had feasted on earlier raids that ventured too close. The B-29 Superfortress was fast and heavily armed, but without protection it was exposed to swarms of defending fighters. The solution was not a larger bomber, but a better escort. That escort was the P-51 Mustang. The Mustang's story began as an aircraft designed for Britain. Early models, powered by Allison engines, performed well at low altitudes but lacked the power to fight at high levels where bombers flew. The British saw potential. They fitted the airframe with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. The transformation was immediate. The Mustang became one of the most formidable fighters of the war. With the Merlin, it reached speeds over 440 miles per hour. Its ceiling climbed above 40,000 feet. Its laminar flow wings reduced drag, giving it unmatched fuel efficiency. Armed with 650 caliber Browning machine guns, it could unleash a storm of 80 rounds every second. Each bullet carried enough energy to tear through aircraft armor and ignite fuel tanks. With nearly 1,800 rounds in total, the Mustang could fight multiple engagements without running dry. By late 1944, Mustangs dominated the skies over Europe. They escorted bombers to Berlin and back, destroying the Luftwaffe in the process. Pilots called it the finest fighter of the war. Now in 1945, it came to the Pacific. Japan's answer was the Nakajima Ki-84 Hayate, known to the Allies as the Frank. It was fast, well-armed, and in the right conditions could match the Mustang. On paper, it was Japan's finest fighter, but the war had eroded Japan's industry. Factories were bombed daily, materials were scarce, engines suffered from poor steel and sloppy assembly, landing gear often failed, collapsing under the weight of the aircraft. The Ki-84 carried heavy cannons, some firing 30mm shells, but ammunition was limited and the weapons often jammed. A Mustang could fire hundreds of rounds in a single engagement. A Ki-84 pilot had to conserve every shot. Other aircraft still filled. Japan's squadrons, the nimble Ki-43, Oscar, the heavier Ki-44, Tojo, the inline-engine Ki-61, Tony, and the aging Zero. Each had once been deadly. By 1945, they were hopelessly outclassed. The greatest problem was fuel. American pilots filled their tanks with 100-octane aviation gasoline, shipped across the Pacific in endless convoys. Japanese pilots flew with fuel that sometimes tested below 87 octane, so poor that engines misfired and pistons cracked. Desperate units experimented with alcohol distilled from sweet potatoes or pine root oil. Engines sputtered and failed before ever reaching combat. On paper, Japan had fighters. In reality, it had fragile shells of machines, sabotaged by the collapse of its own industry. The differences between the pilots themselves were just as stark. American training was long, methodical, and demanding. Pilots often logged 400 to 600 hours before reaching combat. They practiced deflection shooting against moving targets. They drilled formation flying until it became instinct. They learned to navigate with instruments, to fly at night, to trust their machines. By the time they reached Iwo Jima, they were not only confident, but experienced. Japanese pilots of 1945 were shadows of their predecessors. In 1941, they had been among the best in the world, but years of attrition had consumed them. Most of the veterans were dead, lost over the Solomons, New Guinea, or the Philippines. Their replacements were boys, often with less than 100 hours of flight time. Some entered combat after barely 30 hours. Ammunition was so scarce that many had never fired their guns in practice. Morale followed the fuel supply, downward. American pilots believed in their survival. Japanese pilots flew with fatalism, aware they were outnumbered, undertrained, and unlikely to return. When the Mustangs reached Tokyo that April morning, they met the first interceptors head-on. The Japanese formations climbed to meet them, but coordination was poor. Many broke off their attacks too early, unwilling to waste precious fuel. Others hesitated, unsure of tactics. The Mustangs did not hesitate. They dived with speed advantages of more than 100 miles per hour. Their guns spat fire. Short bursts tore wings and ignited fuel tanks. Then they climbed back to altitude, leaving wreckage behind. By day's end, the Mustangs claimed 26 enemy aircraft destroyed at the cost of 2 of their own. The kill ratio was 13-1. For the Japanese pilots who survived, the shock was deeper than numbers. It was the realization that the impossible had arrived, that the skies above the capital were no longer theirs. Altitude determined life and death. At high levels, the Mustang's 2-stage supercharger gave it sea-level power. Japanese engines with single-stage compressors starved for oxygen. At 30,000 feet, the Mustang could still push beyond 420 miles per hour. The Ki-84 struggled to hold 3M50. In dives, the Mustang remained stable at 500 miles per hour. While Japanese fighters risked losing control or tearing apart. Combat became a vertical game. Mustangs struck from above, dove fired and climbed again. Japanese fighters wallowed, unable to follow. It was not only a battle of machines, but of physics itself. Behind every Mustang stood an empire of production. North American Aviation's factories in California and Texas produced Mustangs at a pace that defied imagination. At peak, a new aircraft rolled off the line every hour. Crews of men and women worked day and night, assembling machines destined for the front. By war's end, more than 15,000 Mustangs had been built. The D model alone accounted for over $8,000. Japan, by contrast, managed barely 3,000 Ki-84s, many of them grounded before they ever flew. Others were destroyed by bombers while still on the line. The rest were cannibalized for parts. American abundance versus Japanese scarcity. Standardized quality versus declining reliability. It was not simply combat in the skies. It was the clash of factories, oil fields, and assembly lines. The Mustang's triumph came at a cost. Pilots spent 8 hours strapped into cramped cockpits. Legs cramped, hands numbed, eyes strained. Relief tubes often froze at altitude. Meals were non-existent. Navigation required constant attention. The endless ocean below was a reminder that a single mechanical failure meant certain death. Yet American pilots had hope. Submarines waited along their routes, ready to rescue them. Catalina flying boats stood by. Weather reports were detailed. Instruments were reliable. Japanese pilots had none of this. No rescue if they fell into the sea. No reliable maps. No hope beyond luck. Every flight was a gamble, and every mission a farewell. On June 1, 1945, the Mustangs met their greatest enemy, the sky itself. Nearly 150 aircraft flew into a storm front near Osaka. Clouds towered to 40,000 feet. Lightning flashed across formations. Turbulence tossed planes violently. Compasses spun. Gyroscopes tumbled. Pilots collided in the clouds. Others ran out of fuel, lost and disoriented. In minutes, 27 Mustangs were gone. This day became known as Black Friday. More Mustangs were lost to weather in a single morning than to Japanese fighters in weeks of combat. Even the best machines and the best pilots could be humbled by the fury of nature. By midsummer, Japanese air power had collapsed completely. Fuel shortages grounded entire units. Spare parts were gone. Some squadrons had no functioning aircraft at all. Those that remained were flown by boys barely out of school. Many had less than 40 hours of flight time. Some were ordered not to fire unless certain of a kill, so limited was their ammunition. Entire squadrons ceased to exist. One unit that began April with 40 pilots ended August with only 3. The rest were dead or grounded forever. When American bombers and Mustangs appeared in the sky, resistance was weak, scattered, and hopeless. The Empire could no longer defend itself. On August 10th, Mustangs flew their last air battles over Tokyo. By then, opposition was token. On August 14th, Lieutenant Jerry Yellin and 19-year-old Philip Schlamberg flew against Nagoya. Unknown to them, Japan had already agreed to surrender. Yellin returned. Schlamberg did not. He was the last American combat death of the war. By then, Japanese skies were empty. The war was over. Even before the Emperor spoke, numbers revealed the truth. America, 15,000 Mustangs produced. Japan, 3,000 Hayates. America, 30,000 pilots trained annually, each with 400 to 600 hours of flight. Japan, a fraction of that, many with under 100 hours. America, millions of gallons of high-octane fuel delivered monthly. Japan, pine roots and alcohol distilled into weak substitutes. The outcome was written long before the first dogfight. Courage could not bridge the gulf. If you enjoy deep dives into hidden chapters of World War II, make sure you subscribe and ring the bell. That way you will not miss the next story where we uncover the machines, the men, and the moments that decided history. Today, only one Ki-84 survives, preserved in Japan as a relic of desperation. Hundreds of Mustangs still fly, their Merlin engines roaring in air shows across the world. The contrast tells the story. American aircraft were built to last. Japanese aircraft were built for a war already lost. The Mustang was not only a fighter, it was a philosophy made of steel and fire. It proved that in modern war, courage alone is never enough. Factories, fuel, and logistics decide victory. On that April morning in 1945, Japanese pilots looked up and saw the impossible. They saw fighters where none should be. They saw their skies lost, their empire broken, their future already gone. The P-51 Mustang over Tokyo was the visible truth of modern war, a machine of aluminum and steel, carrying with it the weight of industry, the reach of logistics, and the inevitability of defeat. The divine wind had ended. The empire of the rising sun had been eclipsed by wings of steel.